Hi, everybody. My name is Meg Faure. I'm an occupational therapist, and I have a very special interest in young babies. I suppose all the way through from pregnancy until 5 years old, but specifically newborns and early childhood education are my passion. So just a little bit about me. I'm an occupational therapist. As I said, I have developed this parenting app called Parent Sense, and today we're going to be talking about how to prepare for those first 6 weeks. Just a little bit about the app before I go on. The current app has a home screen, which is a snapshot of your baby's week, as well as a daily routine. And then it has 4 sections. The Play Sense section has got weekly activities and actually daily activities for your little one to do. The health section has got records your baby's weight gain and vaccinations. Sleep section will look at your baby's sleep patterns, and then you can also actually track their sleep, and then of course the feeding section as well. And then there's the tracking screen so that you can use those. If you are tracking your baby, we will actually send you information about your baby's track data weekly. So do use that and have a look at what that looks like. There are also articles for every stage. As I mentioned, the daily activities. The teething graph is going to be loaded fairly soon. You can track your baby's milestones, and then there are also recipes for every meal. So do download the app and use it and give me feedback. And if you're loving it, please do go review it online. So without further ado, let's have a look at the first 6 weeks of your baby's life. So for many of us, when we're in our last trimester of pregnancy, we're focused very much on one thing, and that is, how does my baby come out into this world? Like, how do I go from being pregnant to being a mum with a newborn? And for many of us, we focused on, are we going to have a natural delivery? Maybe it's going to be a water birth. Are we going to have a natural delivery in hospital? Or are we going to have a cesarean section? And so we think a lot about how our baby is going to be born, but not a lot of us think about what's going to happen after that. So what comes after birth is the 4th trimester. Sorry. Sorry, a little piece of toast. So the 4th trimester is that period just after your baby is born. Now, if you think about animals, most animals can immediately, as soon as they're born, get up and run in the field, follow after the herd. But human babies are amongst the most immature babies at birth. The only babies who are more immature than us at birth are actually marsupials. So there you can see our kangaroo, and kangaroos and koala bears are marsupials. And once their babies are born, they're so immature that they have to take them into a pouch. Now, of course, we don't have a pouch, although our stomachs might feel like there's still a pouch in there, but we don't have a pouch. So what do we do in the 4th trimester? Well, one of the things we know about the 4th trimester is that one of the features of the 4th trimester is that there's a lot of crying. So your baby's likely to do more crying in the 4th trimester than they do at any other time in their life. And that 4th trimester, if we think about our first 3 trimesters being the 1st trimester of pregnancy, 2nd trimester of pregnancy, 3rd trimester of pregnancy, birth, and then the 4th trimester is the first 3 months after our babies are born. And your baby will actually cry more than you would believe and more than you would predict in that first 3 months after they're born. This particular curve is known as the crying curve. It shows us how much babies cry. And you can see that for the first 10 days to 2 weeks, crying is pretty low. And in fact, many of you will actually think that your baby is so good and really isn't going to cry much after birth because they're such good little babies in the early days. But what you can see is that all babies worldwide, the crying escalates until about 6 weeks of age. And then it decreases and goes right down by 12 weeks of age. And so that 6-week mark is a big turning point for all babies. So how can we prevent that? How can we make sure our little ones are a whole lot calmer? How do we ease our babies into our busy world? So in Baby Sense, which was the first book that I wrote, I had this quote, and it was that an understanding of your baby's comforts in the womb can help you to make your baby's transition into the real world smoother by modeling her new sensory world on her sensory world in the womb. So we must always look at the womb world when we talk about calming our babies. So when we talk about the senses and the sensory information our babies take in, I want to give you a little reminder about those senses that you know about: the sense of taste, the sense of sight, the sense of hearing, smell, and touch. Those are our 5 senses that we all know about. And then, of course, there's one of our hidden senses, which is the vestibular sense, which is the sense of movement that we get from inside our vestibular system. So let's take each of these senses and look at what goes on in utero and then what we can do afterwards. So the first thing is that in utero, your baby's world of touch is, first of all, skin to skin. It is really tight, it is containing, and it's always the same temperature. So if you're thinking about the womb world in terms of touch, it's tight, it's always the same temperature, and of course, it's skin on skin. So whether it's the skin of your baby holding their umbilical cord or sucking their thumb, or the skin of the intrauterine walls. And so because we know that babies love the sense of touch, or this, and specifically skin to skin, we know that wearing our baby skin to skin in the hours and days after birth is a wonderful way to connect with and bond with your baby. So skin to skin is the first thing that you can do to ensure that your baby is really close with you and is really feeling that skin to skin connection that they had in utero. The second thing in terms of touch is to actually swaddle your baby. And I'm going to show you a little video now that really just shows you how tight that swaddling should be. So let's have a look at how tight. So you can fold your swaddle into a triangle, and then you can swaddle up tightly against the legs, swaddle the one arm towards the chest and the other arm also in towards the chest. Can you see how tight that is? So your baby needs to be really tightly swaddled in order to sleep well. So swaddling is the second thing that you can do. So the first thing you can do to reenact the world of the womb is wear your baby skin to skin, naked against your chest after birth. And the second thing is to swaddle your baby. The third thing in terms of touch is what goes on around the mouth. Now we know that your baby has got more sensory receptors in their mouth than anywhere else in their body in the early days. And in fact, in general. And so we can use that sense of touch in the mouth to really calm our little ones. And so that's why I do really love dummies. And I know some of you might have heard that using dummies is something that is not recommended for newborns because of nipple confusion. Well, I don't agree with that. I think as long as dummies are being used appropriately, in other words, not to fob off a feed, but rather to actually soothe your little one as they're getting that nice peristalsis after a feed. So in other words, use it after a feed, not in place of a feed. You won't develop nipple confusion, and dummies should be used. They're a wonderful way to calm your baby. And then the last thing I want to mention in terms of touch is hands off the baby. Now that doesn't make sense because I've just told you to wear your baby skin to skin. But hands off your baby is more about what happens with other people. Every time your baby goes into somebody's arms or hands or is held by somebody, they have to get used to that person's sensory space. What do they smell like? What do they sound like? How do they hold me? And so when babies are being passed from person to person, like for instance, you go out for a barbecue or a braai and suddenly your baby's being passed around, you'll understand that they can get very easily overstimulated. And so in order to avoid that, avoid passing your baby from person to person. So maybe just you and dad and a granny, but really not too many people handling your little ones. All right, so now let's look at our second sensory input, and that is the sense of movement. Now, the sense of movement is a very important sense. It is a lulling sense. It's found in our vestibular system. And you'll know that you can calm your baby using movement because you do it so naturally. When you pick your baby up, you rock them. And you'll also know that in pregnancy, your baby actually sleeps better during the day when you're moving because you're busy than they do in the evening. The minute you get into bed and lie still, your baby starts to move a lot and wake up. And that's because movement is so lulling. So what can we do in terms of movement? Well, one of the things is to wear your baby. And I really encourage you to get a good and comfortable carrier. I particularly love this one. It's the Snuggle-Roo carrier. And that really will help your baby to soothe and to calm and to sleep better. In terms of soothing sounds for your baby, if you think about the womb world, it's not actually a quiet space. You might think it is. It's actually a really noisy space. What's going on in there? There's white noise of all the churning in your tummy, of your digestion, of your blood flow. Then there's your heartbeat, which is a regular, approximate 70 beats per minute that goes on and on. And then there's the sound of your voice. And so if you think about that as the world of the womb, you're going to want to reenact that when your baby's born. So white noise, download a white noise app, great strategy. Soothing heartbeats, regular heartbeats, and then lulling sounds like your voice and music. So very importantly, soothing sounds. So you might be wondering why on earth in soothing sounds, I've got a picture of Madonna and the baby. What is the significance? Well, what I wanted to tell you about was that when we've looked at the ancient paintings of Madonna and child, and in actual fact, it's not just them, it's any Renaissance picture, any picture of a mother holding a baby, almost all of them are the baby is held up to the left-hand shoulder. And so anthropologists looked at this and thought, that's very interesting. Why do the painters keep painting babies on the left shoulder? And so then a hypothesis came about that was because most people are right-handed and they need their right hand free in order to be able to write. But when you looked at left-handed people, they also predominantly hold their baby on their left shoulder. So why do you think that's so? And what has it got to do with hearing? Well, we surmise that one of the reasons why parents naturally hold their babies on their left shoulders because it's close to their heart, and babies actually soothe faster with that regular 70 beats per minute beat. So holding your baby close to your chest and to your heart can also soothe them, as well as the movement and the touch that comes with that. What about smell and taste? Well, as you're starting to think ahead into giving birth to your baby, let's talk about what goes on in the labor ward. So when your baby's born, they'll be covered in something called vernix. And vernix is that white waxy coating that your baby's covered in utero. And towards the end of the third trimester, it starts to be absorbed by the skin. And so if you have your baby at full term, there might only be a bit of vernix left in their kind of in their wrists, in their elbows and in their hip folds. But if you get a pregnant baby, then they're really still very covered in vernix. Now, vernix is what your baby's used to smelling and tasting in utero. Some of you may not know, but actually your baby can smell and taste in utero. And we know this because little ones whose moms taste or smell something nice, the baby will actually start to swallow the amniotic fluid more frequently so that they can get more of that taste or smell. And so vernix is the smell that they're very used to in utero. So one of the things you can do in the labor ward is request that your baby's not washed immediately after birth. And that will allow your baby to actually get their hands to their mouth and still taste that vernix on their hands. And there has been research that's shown that babies who are not washed immediately after birth are more likely to get their hands to their mouth, and hands to mouth is a wonderful soothing strategy. The second thing I want to mention about smell and taste is that the most natural smell that your baby has experienced in utero is just the smell of you and what your body smells like. And that obviously is immediately after birth as well. So I want to encourage you not to wear perfume and not to use scented creams or baby products immediately after your baby's born, because your baby will be more likely to soothe if they've actually got a smell of mum, not a smell of, or dad, not a smell of like chemicals and artificial perfumes and so forth. When dad gets home from work, he must change out of his work clothes, or when mum gets home from work, because we carry a lot of the smells from our environment on our clothing. For instance, kind of toners or chemical smells from where we're working, or maybe even tobacco smoke if you work in an environment where people have smoked near you. So changing out of work clothes is a good idea when you get home to your newborn. And then using baby-friendly detergents, so things that don't have an overwhelming smell. So go for your brands that have got a baby line. But if you can't find a good, nice softener that doesn't have a scent, then a nice one that I like to use is actually vinegar. So just white spirit vinegar. Quite interesting. You wonder why on earth? Well, first of all, spirit vinegar is actually really good for your washing machine. It is a descaler. But in addition to that, the smell of vinegar actually disappears completely when it's rinsed out of clothes and when clothes are dry. So it's a really neutral smell for your baby that won't bother them and won't overwhelm them and make them overstimulated. And then in terms of taste, your baby is hardwired for sweet tastes. And I think that's one of the reasons why colic medication actually works, because very often it's very high sugar. And so it works because it's got high sugar rather than the fact that it's actually kind of got any medicinal properties. But breast milk will work just as well. It's also super sweet, which is fabulous for little ones. All right, so we've spoken about our different senses and how we can calm our baby through those senses. I want to talk a little bit about what you need to look out for. So your baby has different states, and if you've got the baby sense book, you'll know those different states. One of them is the calm alert state, and one of them is the active alert state or the warning state. And when your baby moves into the warning state, they're starting to give you signals that they're becoming overstimulated. And so the world is a very busy place when babies are born. That's why we like to reenact the womb world, because it's calmer. So in this busy world, your baby might have the capacity to become overstimulated. And so if you see any of these signs, these are often signs that your baby is telling you they've had enough of what is going on in the world. So they might suck their thumb or their hand. They might put their hand to their ears. This is a picture of one of my babies. She used to do this. And the reason she used to do that was she'd bring her hands to midline. So hands to midline is another way babies show that they are helping themselves to settle. As I said, sucking on hands. But if you miss that, they might start to grimace or lose attention. And those are kind of signs that your baby's really had enough. So please watch out for those signs to prevent overstimulation. So when we talk about those signs, one of the ways that we can make sure that babies actually are able to stay settled is if we're watching their awake times. And this is really the secret to your baby falling asleep with ease. And those regular awake times are things that you should watch right from the beginning. So for instance, your newborn would only have 45 minutes to an hour between day sleeps. So from waking up to going back to sleep. And this is important for you to recognize and to put your baby down at those incremental times, because if you do it, they'll settle a whole lot easier. And if they're sleeping throughout the day, those regular intervals, they're not going to be as likely to be overstimulated in the evening. So please watch your baby's awake times. And on your app, if you're following your app, you'll actually see that on the top left side, on the top left widget, you'll actually see a space where it tells you exactly how much your baby should be sleeping each day, or how long their awake time should be. And please do follow that. All right, so here's an example of the wake times. They're quite short. You can see for a 0 to 6 week old, it's only 45 minutes to an hour. For 7 to 12 month old, it's much longer, all the way up to 3 hours between sleeps. And so these are all, as I said, on the app, and you can follow them there and make sure your baby settles back to sleep. All right, just a little bit about newborn sleep and what to expect. Newborns can have unsettled patches with sleep, and these are the usual reasons why newborn sleep can be disrupted. One of them could be a health reason, and that's if your newborn has got reflux. So if your baby's posseting a lot, either bringing up the milk or bringing it into their mouth and swallowing it back down and then looking grimacy afterwards, it might be that they're suffering from reflux. And babies who suffer from reflux often have very short sleep cycles, so like 20 minutes at a time and multiple night wakings. So if your baby in the day is not sleeping longer than 20 minutes and at night they're waking up very regularly, you do want to chat to your healthcare visitor to see whether or not, or to your clinic sister to see if your baby has reflux. In terms of feeding and sleeps, well, your baby in the newborn days, so remember we're talking about newborns here, really does need to feed very regularly at night. So you could even start off from birth at about 3 hourly stretches between night feeds, and eventually they start to become a little bit longer, heading towards 4 hours between night feeds. Remember also that a nice strategy to get your baby to have that one long stretch in the evening is to have a top-up feed before bedtime. So my suggestion is feed your baby one side, one breast before bath, give them a bath, feed them both sides after bath, and then if they're still niggly, give them one more side again, so that you've really kind of given them this cluster feed around about bedtime. And that often helps them to stretch from like a bedtime of 7 o'clock till 11. So a nice 4-hour stretch, or even until 5 o'clock. So try that top-up feed just before bedtime. And then in terms of feeding and sleeps, once your milk is established, which will happen at about 6 weeks of age, you want to start to establish a day routine for your baby's feeds, because that'll help stretch the nights as well. Very often your baby would need a little bit of support to settle in the evening, and that's completely normal. So just, you can watch out for that. They need a little bit of support like carrying or rocking, and there's nothing wrong. You're not going to form habits at that age. At this age, they need to start to screen sensory information. So watch that they're not becoming overstimulated in the early evening. And always remember their times for sleep. For the 0 to 6 week old, it's an hour maximum between sleeps. And for the 6 to 12 week old, it's 1.5 hours between sleeps. But you'll get this in the app, so don't worry, you will get it there. All right. And then finally, just a couple of practical tips for the first few days. The first thing is that your baby is going to lose about 10% of their birth weight, and they'll regain it by 2 weeks. So that's just a little tip that you'll need to know. Another health tip is to feed your baby during vaccinations, because when your baby's feeding, they're getting all that lovely sweetness coming through in the milk, which helps to release all of our feel-good neurotransmitters, which helps to reduce pain. So feeding your baby during vaccinations is a good idea. And then finally, in terms of feeding, feed on demand in the first 6 weeks. Don't try and get your baby into a routine in the first 6 weeks. You're going to interrupt your milk supply, and you're also going to find that your baby's not as settled at night. So feed on demand during the day. And please, in terms of using dummies, don't use a dummy to push feeds out. Remember, I said that earlier. Use a dummy because it calms your baby, but use it after a feed or to calm your baby, not to force milk feeds out. In terms of sleep, what you'll often find in the very early days is your baby is too sleepy to feed. So things like unswaddling them, uncovering their feet, and even taking a wet piece of cotton wool and stroking the bottom of their soles of their feet to make them keep feeding is a really good idea, because if they feed well, they're then likely to sleep better too. One thing that you're going to want to watch out for is day-night reversals. This often happens in the first 6 weeks where your baby actually sleeps for long stretches in the day, like 5 hours between milk feeds, but wakes up very regularly at night, like 2 hourly. So you obviously want to switch that around. You want your baby waking more during the day and sleeping more at night. And the way to do that is to make sure that there's never more than a 4-hour stretch between milk feeds in the day. So if your baby's heading towards 3 hours of a sleep, wake them so that they really have fed by 4 hours. And then at night, as long as your baby is gaining weight, you don't need to wake them unless you've been instructed to by your medical doctor. And then, of course, in terms of sleep, the tidbit I've already given you is watch that awake time of 45 minutes to 60 minutes awake time. And then once your baby is discharged from hospital and you've headed home, follow the guidelines for the calm sensory world, which I've spoken about today. So the swaddling and the skin to skin and the movement and the holding and the white noise and the dummies. These are all wonderful things that you can do to help your baby have to be calmer. Limit visitors, please, not just for your sanity, but also because your baby will become more irritable if they're overhandled. And then start to establish a flexible sleep routine and environment. So not necessarily a feeding routine, that comes after 6 weeks, but certainly in the first 6 weeks, you can start to look towards a flexible sleep routine. And never forget that you actually can't spoil a newborn baby. So lots of love and cuddles. All right, so that's it from me. I hope that you've enjoyed all those tidbits on keeping your babies calm in the early days, a little bit about sleep and feeding. Enjoy your baby. It's precious days. And do go and download the app. You will find an amazing wealth of information in there to guide you in your parenting journey. Thank you for joining me all here today.